Evil Pajamas back here with our 143 turn religious victory with Ethiopia. We have just entered the medieval era, so thanks to the viewers that have stuck around to watch thus far. As you can see, we have zero information on any resources that the AI has because we haven't met anybody. So we're just going to have to guess on the luxury policy. We'll pick the chosen resource of cotton, gives no amenities because we don't have any cotton, and then melee for the unit buff because that is what the AI tends to vote for. It looks like we got our desired outcome on both policies. Not that either of them are particularly that interesting for us. We've finished researching ironworking so that we can build all those swordsmen to fight on our empty island, and then we can find something else that we would like to research, which will probably be masonry because it's sort of embarrassing that we're on turn 90 and we somehow don't have masonry researched. We are the laughing stock of all of the civilizations that we have not met so far. But that's going to change because we are getting ready to resummon our builder on steroids, Hercules. If you bet the over on having enough faith to summon him at the beginning, then you would have been correct. You can see that we have easily enough faith with 478 faith left over, generating almost 100 faith per turn at this point. Now, you can see that I somehow get it notified of sessions of the World Congress from 5 civilizations that I've never met. So I don't know how that happens, like if a bottle just shows up on the shore informing me that there's mystery civilizations out there that are voting in a World Congress that I'm not part of. So right now we are just cleaning up the quick texts that are lower cost texts that we have the boost on, and we'll get the harbors down and get celestial navigation, and then what we want to do is hurry into getting cartography, which is on the actually up on the top of the tech tree rather than the bottom where we're researching. The reason we need cartography is simply so that we can actually traverse the deeper waters in the ocean, in case for some reason like our little island isn't actually just like 10 feet from where we need to get to the other continent. So you can see we'll just have to knock out buttress there first, and then we already have the boost on cartography because I'm such a good planner aheader that I've gotten that boost. Now, on the civic side, we're going to swap off of feudalism because I typically feudally try and get 6 farms built rather than finishing that tech off, but somehow just never managed to get 6 farms built. But we'll try it again anyway. Looks like I can't make up my mind there because I want to get the quick military tradition out. So it looks like we're trying to rush out some builders so that I can get those farms built to finish off the boost for feudalism. The AI is going to feel some futilism after I actually meet them. Travel my Borg ship along, assimilate them to my line of love religion. Now, eventually, what we're going to want to do is work our way over onto the right side of that civics tree that you can't see so that we can get theocracy because we want to get our apostles buff. Our religion only believes in combat-ready apostles. They have their own show, the Bench Press 700 Club. So right now our production is 2 builders and a mosque, but we have a Hercules on the sidelines ready to pounce at a moment's notice and build us another quick district. Now the mosque is the special building that we selected during the religious belief selection, and that is the one that gives an additional spread to your apostles and your missionaries. So if you are wondering what the little X is that pops up as a recommendation when I click on my builders, it is unfortunately not a recommendation to construct a school for gifted mutants. That is the rock-hewn church, which is a pretty awesome special building for Ethiopia that gives additional faith per adjacent hill and mountain tile. I think you can get it actually up to +8. It starts at the base of +2, I think. On a side note, if you don't pick Void Singers as your secret society, Vampire or the Sanguine Pact is also a really great option because of that particular building. We're gonna get our government plaza down, and I have a tendency to get this down much later than I should typically because I'm always trying to like optimize how I can get the most districts around it, which is really dumb because the main thing is you want the building so that you can typically get more settlers out at the 50% faster, and they start with a bonus builder. And the other thing is it gives you a governor title, which is probably the one of the most important aspects of it besides the settler aspect. The building that I'm talking about, I think it's called the Ancestral Hall. Now, in this case, we probably won't use that because there's not a lot of additional buildings that we're going to build, and we're going to be getting it sort of late. We'll probably go with the building that gives amenities. You have governors. If you missed the Great Merchant while I was droning on there, here it is. It is a pretty decent Great Merchant, actually. Don't forget the December 2020 update included a buff to happy and ecstatic production bonuses, buffing them 100% more, basically, from 5 to 10% on happy and from 10% to 20% on ecstatic. Now, if you recall, the medieval era rolled over on turn 90, and we just got our governor title so that we can actually get the tier 2 Void Singer ability. I believe I misspoke earlier and said that this was science, culture, and production. There is no production on it. That would be probably too powerful. It's science, production, and gold, but it's pretty powerful at 20% of your faith generation per turn. We lost 8 turns where we could have had that in place already because we already spent that governor title. We were aware of it at the time. I'm not going to math it out, though, to see whether it was worth it. We finished both our tech research and our civic research this turn. For civic here, probably less important than the all-important cartography we got for the tech research, which is what we're going to need to try and get to our victory condition because we still need to meet other civilizations. Here are the buildings we were talking about earlier from the government plaza. I mentioned I was probably going to go with Audience Chamber here, which is not what I typically pick. I typically pick Ancestral Hall, but because of the way that we don't have a lot of the land to expand on, and we're going to have probably only like 4 cities at most, Audience Chamber I think is the better selection. We are closing out those builders that we are building in those 2 cities. We're going to swap that card out of the wild card slot and then put in the +2 per trade route in that slot in its place. We are running 4 trade routes right now, so that is going to be a pretty decent buff at 8 gold per turn for running that card. We're going to continue building out our farms to try and finish up that boost of feudalism, and they aren't necessarily what I would prefer to build here, but our city population in the capital is at 11, so the farms are still beneficial to increase the housing cap. I don't know if I'll necessarily be working all of those tiles, and though do remember that we took the +2 faith to breathtaking tiles, and that will still apply on those farm tiles. So we're going to put down a theater square here with Hercules in the capital. I'm not a huge fan of this play, but it does have a really good adjacency bonus, which is it's giving 5 culture per turn on the adjacency bonus. But a couple of reasons I'm not a huge fan of that is because, one, I don't like using Hercules to speed up since it only took 4 turns anyway. And 2, I'm not really going for a culture victory, but we do need to get high enough on the civics tree to get the theocracy card. And the other thing being that the other cities don't have room for a new district right now. So it's not like I didn't have a reason for building that. It's just not what I probably would have necessarily preferred. So we don't actually have a reason to improve that duplicate amenity tile. I mean, it would give 2 more gold, but we don't have anybody to trade it to because we haven't met anybody yet. So that's probably the reason why I'm just leaving that alone. We're going to continue going down the civics tree, and we finally did get that feudalism boost. So that will give us the card for +2 charges to builders should we want it. And then that actually does unlock a pretty significant section of the tree there. And we're just going to finish out enable tradition because we only have like there's not a whole lot of use for it, but it's only 1 turn to finish it there. So because we're only 4 turns off from finishing cartography, we can start thinking about taking our units over the water area. So we'll probably go ahead and start with doing that with Hercules. Now, if this had been the first era where I had Hercules, I would probably be more likely to delete him just to get the relic. But since we already have the relic, we're not going to get it again. So we're going to build one apostle here, and we could build a second one, but we want to evangelize belief before we do that. And that is because we want to add the belief that will reduce the cost for purchasing our apostles and missionaries. Or actually, I think it's just apostles. So not sure why I am selecting amphitheater here, other than maybe thinking I need more culture. But Holy Order is what we're going to need to take here to reduce the cost, and that does affect missionaries and apostles. We are in good shape on faith. They're generating 100 per turn. Now, the cost of the missionaries will continue to go up or I'm sorry, the apostles and the missionaries will continue to go up as we continue to purchase them. But I do not think we're going to run into a big problem in terms of having enough faith to continue purchasing how many that we need. Now we finished the lighthouse in Gondar, so that will give us another opening for trade routes. So I think building a trader there is a good idea because that will continue to contribute to our economy. Now because my Magnus does not have surplus logistics, I don't have a reason to have to leave him in a particular city right now. So I'm going to move him over to Gondar because I have more chops that I want to do over there as opposed to Mikkel that doesn't really have anything that's going to benefit off of his plus 50% chops. Now, we can build another shrine here, which isn't like the greatest in terms of production to amount of faith that it's generating, considering how much I can get off of building the rock-hewn churches, but it's working a slot that's already been taken up by a building to get that +2 faith, as opposed to rock-hewn church, which will take up another tile that I would otherwise be maybe working. We still want to get to theocracy on our civics tree, so I am going to give Pingala the connoisseur title. That's going to give us 11 more faith, or I'm sorry, 11 more culture in the capital. That's along with the nice little +5 that we already got from that theater square. So that's going to be +16 on top of what we are already getting from where we were at before we built that amphitheater, or not the amphitheater, the theater square. Now, we still have one belief left on our religion, which is oddly the belief type that I usually take first, which is the one that actually generates resources. I forget what actual type of belief that's called. They have belief types, and you can only take one of each type, but it's the one with the little book and quill there. Now, it would probably make the most sense to take pilgrimage here to generate even more faith because I have the tier 2 Void Singer ability, which gives us faith to begin with, based upon how much we are generating in the city, and we aren't really hurting too much for our other civics and techs. So I'm not sure why I'm thinking so long on this one because I don't think I need that much more culture to get to the theocracy that we need. So looks like we did go with what I now also think is the right choice. We still got some builder improvements to use. A +4 face rock-hewn church isn't great, but it's not terrible either. It's about average-ish. So I think that that's a good use for that tile improvement. So we got a Great Admiral, which I'm usually not typically too excited about unless I am playing like for Hermetic Order because of the Tier 3 Leylines ability, but this particular one gives us another ship, which is good because we need to do some exploring. Now, I think at this point in the video, I am probably going to try and speed up the footage here because we are going to get to a phase of the game where you're just going to see me building a whole bunch of apostles and dragging them across the sea, which I'm not sure how educational that really is or entertaining. You should note here that I'm taking debate over translator because I want the +20 to religious combat, and that is because I don't know how much resistance is going to be in the other civilizations at this point. So taking the triple strength to conversion, I don't think is as valuable right now as having the +20. So I think I've mentioned this before in other videos, but if you have the +20 religious strength in combat, you just don't use up the last charge on your apostle, and you just wander around and kill missionaries and apostles from other civilizations. As you'll want to drag a guru along at some point if you're doing that. When we finish medieval fairs here, we'll have the opportunity to swap policy cards, and that will be good because we can swap out the one that's giving us +1 to envoys because that's not super useful right now. And then instead we can swap in the one that gives us +1 gold to each envoy that we have, which is still not very useful considering we don't have very many envoys out, but it's better than what we're getting. We have an additional governor title to use, and normally during this situation, the best choices would probably be either surplus logistics on Magnus or to give another promotion to Pangala for researcher or grants. But we don't need that much more research for what we're trying to achieve, and we still have one city without a governor, and we're probably going to use some builders still. So I think that Liang is actually the better choice, but most of the time there, you're probably going to take a Pangala promotion. It's just in this particular instance, I don't anticipate needing a lot of additional science. I am trying to close out the win at this point. So our tech tree is going to be less important really than our civics tree at this point because again, we still need theocracy. We don't need it, but I think it's definitely useful to have. So we're going to want to do that and continue building our infrastructure and then trying to get across the ocean over here. You can see that we are near getting across the ocean, I think, and the reason you can see that is because that there is a reef tile over there, which should indicate that there's a landmass right on the other side. We built another settler, which I don't even really sure, I'm not even really sure if I need that, but I just feel like 3 cities just isn't a lot, but I'm not sure how quickly that settler will be useful. So on turn 109, we have finally another civilization. We can see they have quite a strong military. He's at 672 is his military. But as long as they're not sending like a navy over to like invade our cities, that is going to be okay. I'm not terribly worried about that. We're also on friendly terms. We unlocked another governor title. I'm not sure what we are going to use it on, but we do want to consider a policy swap since we're not building any settlers. Let's give extra charges to our newly trained builders. Now we're going to start getting our apostles in the area that they need to be. And as you're doing this, you want to just sort of keep track of their movement so that you can move as far in as possible. If they have potions to use and you get to a spot where you can only use, like, you can't move any more squares, but they seem to have movement left, that's a good time to use their promotion then, so you're not wasting turns on moving. So we're going to try and haggle to sell some iron because the iron is not something that we're going to be using. You can almost always tack on like one Diplo favor to your deals, in addition to anything else that you're haggling for. They will usually give that up. So if you're just looking for any little edge, that's something you can do while you're trading. Another neat little trading trick, not related to what I'm doing here, is that if there is a resource that doesn't give any amenities, but you're nearing the end of the period where that is in effect, the AI will actually severely undervalue that and end up trading it to you for super cheap, like half as much as usual, even if there's only like 4 turns left on that effect. So you can try and take advantage of that when you're trading. So if you have a ton of money, you should consider always buying your buildings if it is appropriate. So I try to not build buildings that I know I can buy if I am generating a lot of income. So at this point, what we're really concerned about is faith. So even with like not a great adjacency, I think a holy site is probably the most productive that new city is going to be, but it's not going to be super productive if it takes like 50 turns. So I don't know if we'll necessarily get Hercules out in time, but let's go ahead and get out there and do some more proselytizing or whatever it is that they call it. But we're going to make an alliance here with Turkey, so that will prevent them from attacking us, and we can start to get alliance points. I don't know how useful those will be actually with the victory condition that we are trying for, though. I like the location for our fourth city because it has a lot of shops. At some point, we should consider rotating Magnus over there. I'm not sure why I didn't do it right at that time. There's probably some good reason for it, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. Now, note that Istanbul converted pretty easily there, so that was nice because it gives us a chance to get some religious pressure in on those adjacent cities. And I can see also that there's a white border on the religious pressure from the east, so that's good because that means there's like just a neutral, no religion city over there. So we have met Germany now, so he should be thrilled that we don't have any city-state friends because he has a hard-on for killing city-states. So because we finished the Reformed Church civic, that should give us access to the theocracy policy that we wanted. We're trying to make a decision here on what to build in our capital. It can be a little bit tricky when you're playing to just focus on religion because you're so used to building out other things that are more of a long game sort of thing. I think I took campus research grants there because I was racing for a particular great person. So theocracy is our optimal government here because it gives us additional faith in our cities with governors, makes our apostles cheaper, and makes our religious units stronger in combat. So triple threat there. Note that I slotted simultaneum there, which we will get the effect from the plus 50% due to having sufficient adjacency bonus in the capital, but it now requires 15 population. This is the December update, which we don't have, but the plus 50% is still pretty good. But that is city-based, remember, and my other cities do not have the requirement met. We are nearing 14 population in the capital, though, so we'll only need one more population after that to reach the full effect of that card in the capital. Now, the other nice thing about being way over here on this other continent and not being involved in any land wars is I don't have to worry about getting in a war where my religious units can be condemned by the other side. So that can actually really hinder your attempt at religious victory sometimes if you end up in a war and you have to run your religious units by hostile territory. It's possible for them to just get condemned, which is just the equivalent of getting one-shotted. Now, we did a devotion to Himiko over in our other city as our second hero, and the reason that we did that is because we just don't know what the other city-states are, and they might have bonuses that could be useful for us. And then the other thing is, too, since we don't have any real military presence, that will allow us, should we need to fight off any aggression, we can use those city-state units to sort of delay the aggression while we continue to try for our religious victory if that's necessary. This is an example of a little spiel I went through before about luxuries that are not giving amenities due to the World Congress. That you can see here that Nubia is really like overpaying for on that trade. So that's what I was talking about. So I don't have a ton left useful to say about my strategy here. Mainly, you're going to just continue accumulating faith. You're going to want to explore and survey to see how much pushback you're going to get on the religious pressure. You're going to want to position your strong combat religious units sort of off near the most competitive areas as far as pushback, while you continue to press forward into the other areas with your apostles that have promotions for plus to triple strength to other religions and 75% of pressure removed from other religions. So at this point, I would literally just be talking for the sake of talking to have something to say until the end of the video because I just shared what everything that you would need to know at this point. So I think what I will do is if you want to continue watching through the rest of the victory here, you can just enjoy some background victory celebration music here.